Hey everybody! This is Death by D4, and welcome to my guide on all of the new feats presented in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There's a lot to go over, so be sure to subscribe and let's dive right on in. First up, we've got Artificer Initiate, which allows you to pick and cast a cantrip and a first level spell from the Artificer spell list. You can also cast this new first level spell for free once per long rest. Finally, you also gain proficiency in any one artisan tools of your choice, and can even use this tool as a spellcasting focus for all of your intelligence-based spells. In general, this is just the Artificer version of Magic Initiate, trading off an additional cantrip in favor of a tool proficiency instead. Though not necessarily what I would consider to be a very good feat overall, it does allow you to add a little bit of Artificer flavoring to any character without having to necessarily invest an entire level of multi-classing into it. So yeah, a pretty niche feat overall, but one that's still a pretty nice option for you to have whenever you actually need it. Next up, we've got Chef, which allows you to increase your Constitution or Wisdom score by 1, grants you proficiency in Cook's Utensils, allows you to use your Cook's Utensils to prepare food for a number of creatures equal to 4 plus your proficiency bonus, increasing any healing that you receive by any hit dice that you spend during a short rest by 1d8, and allows you to prepare a number of treats during a long rest equal to your proficiency bonus. A creature can then eat one of these treats as a bonus action, gaining temporary hit points equal to your proficiency bonus. Alright, so, though this isn't what I consider to be a very good feat overall, being able to flavor yourself as a seasoned chef is just really fun in general. So though its healing and shielding effects are pretty minimal, if you're looking to add some culinary roleplay to your character's repertoire, then definitely consider taking this feat for yourself. Next up, we've got Crusher, which increases your strength or constitution score by 1, allows you to knock a creature of one size larger than you back 5 feet whenever you hit a creature with an attack that deals bludgeoning damage once per turn, and imparts advantage on all attacks made against a creature that you land a critical hit against with a bludgeoning attack until the start of your next turn. Wow! I'm not gonna lie, but this feat is absolutely ridiculous. Sure, the knockback effect and the stat increase are both pretty minimal, but having the chance to just lock in advantage against your target for an entire round by just landing a critical hit against them is just absolutely incredible. Not only that, but the best thing about this feat is the fact that it works in all forms of bludgeoning damage, meaning that it can work with spells and, most importantly, amongst unarmed strikes. Seriously, just wow! What an absolutely incredible feat, and one that I would highly recommend taking if bludgeoning damage is your specialty. Next up, we've got Eldritch Adept, which allows you to gain an Eldritch Invocation from the Warlock class, that is assuming that you possess the spellcasting or pack magic features. However, the Eldritch Invocation that you select must be one that lacks a prerequisite of any kind, otherwise you must be a Warlock that would otherwise be able to meet the prerequisite normally. Again, just wow! So basically, this feat just allows you to gain any Eldritch Invocation without actually needing to sacrifice an entire 2 levels into multiclassing Warlock. That is just insane. Sure, the limitation of it lacking a prerequisite is pretty harsh, but there are still plenty of useful invocations that you could take, like Armor of Shadows, Devil's Sight, or Mask of Many Faces, just to name a few. However, just realize that you won't be able to take certain Eldritch Invocations like Ascendant Step or Agonizing Blast, because even if you do meet this prerequisite, they still technically have a prerequisite, meaning that you must meet them normally as a Warlock in order for them to qualify for this feat. So either use this feat to give yourself a touch of Eldritch power, or to load up on even more invocations for yourself. Either way, this is definitely a super solid feat overall, and one that you could easily make use of on almost any character build out there. Next up, we've got Fey Touched, which increases your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma score by 1. And you learn the Misty Step spell, along with one other first level spell of the Divination or Enchantment Schools of Magic. You can then cast both of these spells once for free, recharging after a long rest. A pretty nice feat overall, especially for a spellcaster. After all, Misty Step is a very nice get out of jail free spell whenever you need it. And there are some other fairly useful Divination enchantment spells that you could pick from, such as Bane, Bless, Detect Magic, Hex, and even Hunter's Mark, just to name a few. Either way, if you find yourself short on a couple of useful spells, then consider taking this feat for yourself. Up next, we've got Fighting Initiate, which allows you to gain a fighting style of your choice, assuming that you have a proficiency in a martial weapon. Definitely a really solid pick for you to pick as a martial class, especially if you're looking to gain access to a particular fighting style beyond the options available to you already. That said, not necessarily a feat that I would consider taking on a non-martial character, but for those interested, there are probably some good options for you to pick still. Up next, we've got Gunner, which increases your dexterity score by 1, grants you proficiency in firearms, allows you to ignore the loading property of firearms, and allows you to attack with a firearm at a target standing within 5 feet of you without imparting disadvantage on your attack roll. In general, this is very much like the Crossbow Expert feat, though largely flavored around firearms instead. That said, it should go without saying that firearms are only briefly spoken about in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and that they aren't necessarily considered standard for just any Dungeons & Dragons campaign. However, if your game happens to feature firearms, then this feat's got you covered. Otherwise, I guess you could just ignore this feat then. Next up, we've got Metamagic Adept, which grants you 2 metamagic options and 2 sorcery points, assuming that you possess the spellcasting or pact magic features. As a minor note, these sorcery points recharge after a long rest instead of a short one. Certainly a useful feat, but not one that I would actually recommend taking unless you're planning on playing as a sorcerer. After all, a non-sorcerer isn't really going to get a whole lot of use out of this feat before they've exhausted their limited number of sorcery points. Meanwhile, a proper sorcerer is going to gain even more metamagic options for themselves, and a fairly sizable boost to their sorcery point total, allowing them to become even more versatile with their metamagic castings. So yeah, definitely a really solid option for you to take as a sorcerer, and a minor consideration at best if you're not. Up next, we've got Piercer, which increases your strength or dexterity score by 1, allows you to reroll a piercing attack's damage die once per turn, and grants you an additional die of damage whenever you land a critical hit against a creature with an attack that deals piercing damage. Wow! Now, Crusher may have been a good feat overall, but Piercer is just absolutely absurd. Seriously, everything about this feat is just incredible for you, and the fact that it just works with piercing damage makes it widely applicable to all sorts of variety of classes and builds out there. From rogues to rangers and even fighters, this is just an awesome feat to take in general. So yeah, if piercing damage is your specialty, then definitely consider this feat for yourself as soon as possible. Next up, we've got Poisoner, which allows any poison damage that you deal to ignore poison resistance, allows you to apply poison to a weapon or piece of ammunition as a bonus action, and grants you proficiency with the Poisoner's Kit. Also, over the course of an hour, you can spend 50 gold pieces worth of materials to create a number of poison doses equal to your proficiency bonus. When applied to a weapon or piece of ammunition, this poison then lasts for up to 1 minute or until you successfully land an attack with it. Any creature hit by one of your poisoned weapons must then make a DC 14 Constitution saving throw, or take 2d8 poison damage and become poisoned until the end of your next turn. Alright, so if dealing poison damage is something that interests you, then you should probably consider taking this feat for yourself. However, only consider taking this feat if you plan on actually making use of all of its bonuses. Otherwise, you really might as well just pick something else entirely. Anyway, this feat does actually give you a pretty easy way of making a decent poison for yourself, not to mention the fact that your poison can inflict the poison condition, which is a very detrimental status overall. That said, the duration of this condition is extremely short, but being able to reapply the poison as a bonus action then does kind of help mitigate this a bit. Oh, and though this is pretty minor, it's worth mentioning that this feat's ability to ignore poison resistances also extends to any poison damage that you deal, so even your spells are going to benefit from this as well. However, it's probably worth noting the fact that there are a million creatures immune to poison damage and very few that are actually resistant to it, so yeah, I don't really know how useful this is actually. All in all, not what I would consider to be a game-changing feat by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely one worth taking if this particular style of play interests you. Up next, we've got Shadow Touched, which increases your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma scores by 1, and you learn the invisibility spell along with one other first level spell from the illusion or necromancy schools of magic. You can then cast both of these spells once for free, recharging after a long rest. In general, this is just the darker themed version of Fey Touched. However, unlike with Fey Touched, you're probably not going to get quite as much use out of this particular feat. Invisibility, though certainly is not a bad spell by any stretch of the imagination, is really only useful for non-combative situation, as you cannot make attacks or cast spells and remain invisible at the same time. That and it should be worth noting that the array of spells made available to you to learn at first level from the illusion and necromancy schools is a bit more limited than that for divination and enchantment. However, I will give a special shout out to Inflict Wounds, as that spell is just absurdly powerful for a first level spell. So yeah. Definitely not what I would consider to be an amazing feat overall, but certainly one that has its fair amount of potential for you, so consider taking it if it interests you. Up next, we've got Skill Expert, which increases one of your ability scores by 1, grants you proficiency in any one skill of your choice, and grants you expertise in any one skill that you are already proficient with. Definitely a super handy feat if you're interested in expanding or improving your array of skills made available to you, so take it if it interests you. Next up, we've got Slasher, which increases your strength or dexterity scores by 1, allows you to reduce a creature's speed by 10 feet whenever you deal slashing damage to them, and imparts disadvantage on all attack rolls made by a creature that you land a critical hit against that deals slashing damage until the start of your next turn. Certainly not what I would consider to be the strongest of the 3 new martial damage type feats, but certainly one that still has its fair share of uses. After all, slowing down a creature beside you, let alone imparting disadvantage on all of its attack rolls whenever you land a critical hit, can be very complementary to a tanky character playstyle, allowing you to fairly easily hold them down around you, and reduce the threat of any enemies nearby you. That said, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is quite as effective as the whole Polearm Master and Sentinel feat combo, but it does still work pretty well overall, and can be applied to a longsword and shield loadout instead. So if you're looking for an alternative means of playing as a tanky style character for yourself, then definitely consider taking this feat for yourself as soon as possible. Up next, we've got Telekinetic, which increases your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma scores by 1, and grants you the ability to cast the Mage Hand cantrip. When you do this, you can cast Mage Hand without requiring any verbal or somatic components, and when you cast it, you can choose to make your Mage Hand invisible. Also, the range of this cantrip increases by 30 feet if you already know the cantrip. Finally, as a bonus action, you can then force a creature within 30 feet of you to succeed on a strength saving throw, determined by your ability score that you improve with this feat. On a failed save, the creature is then shoved 5 feet towards or away from you. Alright, so basically this feat just grants you a better version of Mage Hand, and then allows you to then nudge creatures around at a distance. Certainly something that I can imagine being very useful on some characters, but certainly less useful for others. Mage Hand in general is just a very good cantrip. However, even with its better version, just taking this feat solely for that would be kind of a waste. Likewise, shoving a creature around could allow you to then pin them into one of your area of effects spells, or off of a cliff if you really want to. But keep in mind that you can only do this with one creature at a time, and you can only move them 5 feet towards or away from you when you do so. So because of this, I'd argue that your ability to actually make good use of this is actually pretty limited overall. So yeah, definitely not a bad feat by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly one that you'll want to take careful consideration of before taking. And finally, for our last new feat in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we've got Telepathic, which increases your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma scores by 1, allows you to speak telepathically to any creature within 60 feet of you, and allows you to cast Detect Thoughts without requiring any spell components. You can also cast Detect Thoughts once without requiring a spell slot, recharging after a long rest. Definitely a super fun feat for you to take for its roleplay applications, but not one that I would say is all that good overall. After all, telepathy and detect thoughts will only get you so far before swords and shields eventually get drawn, and once they have, this feat isn't really going to do anything else for you. However, until that happens, this feat is pretty useful for you. So if the idea of you sneakily assaulting and reading the thoughts of others interests you, then feel free to grab this feat for yourself. And that's it. If you liked the video, then be sure to subscribe and let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if you'd like to have the chance to play D&D with me, then feel free to join my Discord server. And consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see all of you in the next video.